I was 24 when I bought my first home. It was a modest but comfortable two-bedroom house with peeling paint, a stubborn front gate, and a yard that badly needed mowing. To most people, it probably looked like an ordinary starter home. To me, it represented nearly a decade of hard work. From the age of 16, I had been financially independent, working 2 jobs through high school, skipping parties, skipping vacations. While my friends shared pictures of their summer trips, I was stocking shelves on night shifts at a gas station until 3 a.m. I never asked my parents for help, not for rent, not for tuition, not even for gas money. In truth, they rarely offered, and I learned not to expect it. I believed that if I wanted a future, I had to build it myself. Naively, I assumed my parents would be proud. I didn't expect a celebration, but at least a simple "well done" would have been nice. Instead, there was silence, and then the barbecue. That family barbecue was supposed to be a casual weekend gathering with cousins, burgers, and beer. I drove over early because my mom had asked me to help set up tables. I thought it was her way of softening the distance that had grown between us since I moved out at 18. But when I arrived, it felt more like stepping into a pressure cooker. The first warning sign was my younger brother Dean lounging on the patio as if it were his own space. He's 22, still living at home, unemployed, and for reasons I'll never understand, my parents treat him like he's fragile. He barely looked at me when I walked in, just smirked and went back to his phone. I brushed it off and started setting up chairs. Half an hour later, the guests had arrived and the family was mingling with drinks when Mom clapped for attention. "Everyone," she said with a strange little smile, "Cody's here and apparently thinks he's better than the rest of us because he bought a house." The laughter that followed was awkward, like people weren't sure if it was a joke. I stood there holding a tray of plates, heat rising up my neck. Thanks," I said, trying to keep things light. But Dad wasn't joking. He took a sip of his beer and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Must be nice to play landlord while your brother can't even get ahead. Some of us actually care about family." That one cut deep. I'd never once said no to small favors. Just last month, I'd lent Dean my car for a week when his broke down. I sat down quietly with a paper plate, hoping the moment would pass. But Mom continued. She told everyone how unfair it was that I had a house while Dean was still struggling. She left out the fact that Dean had turned down 3 job interviews because he didn't feel like working retail. Then she pointed at me across the table and said, "You stole your brother's future." It felt like being slapped in public. "Excuse me?" I asked. She crossed her arms, looking firm. "You bought that house before Dean had a chance. Now the market's impossible, and you locked him out. How's he supposed to start a life when you took the opportunity first?" I honestly thought I'd misheard. The house I'd bought was a foreclosure I'd been saving for since I was 17. It had nothing to do with Dean. But no one said a word. Not Dad, not my cousins, not even my drama-loving aunt. I left early, no slammed doors, no yelling, just thanked them for dinner and drove home with my chest tight and my jaw clenched. That night, sitting in my empty living room on a folding chair surrounded by boxes, I couldn't stop replaying her words. Stole his future. As if buying something with my own savings was theft. As if I owed Dean something. For the first time, I felt not just hurt, but angry. Angry at them and at myself for believing that if I worked hard enough, they'd respect me. Then came the next blow. A week later, a process server arrived at my door. At first, I laughed, thinking it was a mistake. But inside the envelope was a lawsuit from my parents. The claim? Intentional interference with Dean's economic prospects. I read it 3 times before it sank in. They were literally blaming me in court for buying a house before Dean could. That's when something inside me shifted. The anger turned cold. This wasn't a family argument anymore. This was a battle. I'd always known they favored Dean, but I convinced myself it was normal. Kid gloves, extra dessert slices, new sneakers for him, while mine had to last another year. I thought adulthood would level the playing field. That envelope proved I was wrong. The next day, I went to my parents' house. I didn't go to yell. I just wanted answers. Mom opened the door like nothing had happened. "Oh, good, you're here," she said, stepping aside as though we were meeting for coffee. I held up the envelope. "You sued me." She didn't even flinch. "You forced our hand, Cody. We had no choice." "No choice?" I asked, forcing my voice down. "You're taking me to court because I bought a house with my own money?" Dad walked in from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel like he'd been waiting for this moment. "You knew your brother was planning to move out," he said. "You scooped up a house before he could, knowing it would crush him." I blinked. What house was Dean going to buy? He doesn't even have a job. "Not yet," Dad replied, as if that explained everything. "We were going to help him with a down payment. You ruined that plan by buying in the same neighborhood." "So let me get this straight," I said. "You were going to buy Dean a house, but now you can't because you think there aren't enough houses to go around?" Mom crossed her arms. "It's about fairness, Cody. You don't need a house yet. You could have waited." I almost laughed. "I didn't even tell you until after C." I almost laughed. "I didn't even tell you until after closing. I thought maybe you'd be proud of me." She gave me a pitying look. "We would be proud if you thought about someone other than yourself for once." At that moment, I realized nothing I said would matter. They'd already cast me as the villain. I left before I said something I couldn't take back. But walking away didn't stop it. Over the next few weeks, the family closed ranks around Dean. My aunt called to suggest I do the right thing and sign over the house. My cousin sent me an article about housing inequality with a thumbs up emoji. Even my grandma called late at night, disappointed in me for putting myself before family. Dean, of course, enjoyed the attention. He posted vague comments online like, "Some people don't care if you sink as long as they swim," and "Imagine taking what was meant for someone else," turning me into a villain in a story I never agreed to. The next family dinner was worse. Dean sat at the head of the table in Dad's seat, smirking. "Oh, look," he said loudly, "the homewrecker's here." Mom told me they'd drop the lawsuit if I sold the house and split the profit with Dean. I couldn't believe it. "You think I'm going to give up my house, because you've decided Dean deserves it more?" Dad leaned forward. "You wouldn't have been able to buy that place without everything we taught you. Without our roof over your head, you owe us." I took a deep breath. "I paid rent when I lived here, remember? I gave you money every month since I was 16. You charged me for groceries. I didn't owe you then, and I don't owe you now." Dean chimed in, smirking. "You've always been jealous. You can't stand that Mom and Dad love me more, so you buy your way into being the golden child." "Dean, I don't want to be the golden child," I said. "I just wanted a house. You're the one making it a competition." He shrugged. "If you really cared about this family, you'd give me a chance to have what you have." That's when I realized they didn't see me as family anymore. I was just a resource to exploit. The following weeks were worse. Someone tried to access my bank account using my personal details. My insurance company called to confirm I'd canceled my homeowner's policy, something I hadn't done. They had my policy number, my address, even my security question. My mother's maiden name. My bank confirms 2 login attempts from my parents' IP address. I drove over one last time, holding the printed email like evidence. "Did you try to hack my bank account?" I asked. Dad muted the TV. "Watch your tone." Dean smirked. "Maybe you should have better passwords." "You did this?" I said. "You tried to break into my account?" He shrugged. "I just wanted to see how much you had. Thought maybe you'd have enough to help out." "That's illegal," I said. Mom put down her knitting. "Don't be dramatic, Cody. He's your brother. Families share things." "Families don't steal from each other," I snapped. Dad stood up, towering over me. "Lower your voice. We won't have you disrespecting us." "You're suing me," I said. "You tried to cancel my insurance. You tried to hack my bank account, and you're worried about respect?" Mom's face hardened. "We had no choice. You forced us to act." That was it. I realized there was no line they wouldn't cross. The utilities for my house were suddenly being canceled. Someone even reported a gas leak at 3 a.m., bringing the fire department to my door. I installed cameras. That's how I caught Dean pulling up my for sale sign in the middle of the night, flipping off the camera. I printed the footage and went to the police. They suggested a restraining order. 2 nights later, Mom and Dad showed up at my door, furious. "Why did you call the police on your brother?" Mom demanded. "Because he trespassed on my property," I said calmly. Dad's face turned red. "You're destroying this family." "You did that yourselves," I replied. "You sued me. You hacked me. You tried to shut off my water. I'm done being the bad guy." Mom's voice went cold. "If you go through with that restraining order, you won't have a family left." "I don't think I do anymore," I said quietly, closing the door. Even then, the worst betrayal was still coming. A week later, I received a letter from HR at my job, an anonymous complaint accusing me of fraud and embezzlement. I didn't need to guess who sent it. I'd worked at that company for 3 years, stayed late, covered shifts, never complained. Now, because of one complaint, they were investigating me like a criminal. I was placed on administrative leave. Losing my income meant my house could be at risk, and I knew that's exactly what my parents wanted. The weeks blurred. I gathered bank statements and pay stubs for HR while preparing for the lawsuit. The stress wore me down. Sleepless nights, no appetite, withdrawing from friends. Then my mortgage company called. Because of the lawsuit and the investigation, my credit score had dropped. They were reviewing my loan. One more problem, and I could lose the house I'd worked nearly a decade to buy. That night, I sat on my living room floor among unpacked boxes. I thought of the nights I'd worked double shifts, the vacations I'd skipped, the sacrifices I'd made. And now it all felt like it could vanish because my family had decided I'd stolen something I'd earned. I don't know how long I sat there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Long enough for the anger to fade into something quieter. Resolve. Because I'd been here before. Not in this exact situation, but at this point. But bottom, where you either break or build something new. At 16, I sat in my room with a backpack full of clothes, knowing my parents wouldn't help me and that I had to figure everything out alone. I remembered that feeling and that I survived. So that night, I made a choice. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't sell my house or give Dean a cent. I wouldn't let them break me, even if it meant crawling through every obstacle they put in my way. The first step was hiring a better lawyer. I sold my old car to cover the retainer and bought a cheap used one just to get to work. My new attorney actually listened, reviewed my case, and started building a real strategy instead of telling me to settle. Then I got serious about security. I froze my credit, changed every password, added two-factor authentication to everything from my bank account to Netflix. I installed a better camera system with cloud storage so nothing could vanish if tampered with. I also started documenting everything. Every call, every letter, every strange attempt to interfere with my life. I filled a binder with notes, screenshots, and copies of police reports. I even logged the times Dean or my parents drove past my house. At work, I remained polite and professional during the investigation, though inside I was furious. I began quietly digging, asking HR questions about the complaint, looking for any clue of its origin. They couldn't say much, but one slip revealed the caller had mentioned my family feud. That was all the confirmation I needed. The hardest part was staying silent. Every instinct told me to go online, post the footage, and expose my family. But I didn't, not yet. I kept my head down, built my case, and waited, because I knew something they didn't. They had left a trail, and eventually I would use it against them. But first, I had to survive the worst blow. The court date was near, and I knew my parents wouldn't fight fair. Sure enough, a week before the hearing, I received a package. Inside was a stack of edited screenshots, old texts I'd sent Dean, completely out of context, making me look threatening. On top was a handwritten note in my mother's neat script. This is what happens when you turn your back on your family. Holding that note, something shifted. It wasn't fear this time. It was clarity. I finally understood exactly who I was dealing with. My parents weren't just angry or disappointed. They were willing to destroy everything, me, my job, my reputation, to prove they controlled the narrative. And for the first time in months, I felt a strange calm. When you realize the other side is willing to play dirty, you stop wasting energy trying to be the better person and start focusing on winning. The next morning, I called my lawyer and handed him the package. He flipped through the pages, his brows rising. "This is good," he said. I blinked. "Good? It's fabricated," he replied, holding up a screenshot. "See here? The timestamps don't match. And this one? You didn't even have this phone number 3 years ago. This will look very bad for them in front of a judge." For the first time since this started, I smiled. That moment lit a fire under me. I doubled down on gathering evidence. Phone records, bank statements, even an affidavit from a friend who witnessed some of those supposed threats. My lawyer compiled it all into a neat, damning portfolio. Meanwhile, things at work improved. HR completed its investigation and cleared me completely. They even flagged the anonymous complaint as harassment and sent it to legal. My manager called personally to say I could return. Walking back into the office after weeks of leave felt surreal. People had obviously heard about the drama, but I held my head high. My manager offered me a bigger project than anything I'd handled before. "You've been through a lot," she said, "but we know what kind of employee you are. We trust you." Those words hit me hard. After months of being treated like a villain, it felt good to be seen for who I truly was. I threw myself into work, stayed late voluntarily, and by the end of the quarter, I not only finished the project, but exceeded every metric. Then came the kicker: a raise. A big one. It wasn't just the money, though that felt great. It was about taking back control of my life. For months, I'd been reacting to their attacks. Now, I was rebuilding. I also started making changes at home. I unpacked the boxes, hung pictures on the walls, mowed the yard, fixed the gate, and planted a small vegetable garden. My house stopped feeling like a target and started feeling like mine. Socially, I let people back in. I had dinner with friends, hosted a small housewarming. It felt good to laugh without checking my phone every 5 minutes for the next disaster. But healing didn't mean forgetting. I planned quietly, carefully, patiently. I dug into public records, property deeds, tax filings, even court documents. That's when I found something interesting. My parents weren't as financially stable as they claimed. They'd taken out the second mortgage 2 years ago and were behind on payments. Suddenly, their obsession with my house made sense. They weren't just angry at my success, they were desperate. I didn't act immediately. I tucked the information away in my binder. If they wanted me to be the villain, fine. I'd play the part, on my terms. A week before the court date, my lawyer scheduled a deposition. I sat quietly as he questioned them, calm and professional. My mother tried to maintain her righteous fury, but the cracks showed every time Dean's future came up. My lawyer pointed out that Dean had no job, no savings, and no plan to buy a house, and that my purchase didn't affect him. Then he pulled out the forged screenshots. "Can you confirm these are authentic?" he asked. Mom hesitated, a fraction too long. "Yes," she said finally. "Interesting," my lawyer replied, flipping to the next page. "Because our expert analysis shows these were created on a phone belonging to your younger son, Dean. Would you like to revise your answer?" I'll never forget the look on her face. For once, she had no comeback. After the deposition, my lawyer grinned. They're going to regret filing this lawsuit. I could feel it too, the shift in power. For the first time, I wasn't on the defensive. As the court date approached, I felt something sharper than confidence. They had humiliated me, sabotaged me, tried to destroy my career. They crossed every line and acted shocked when I fought back. I wasn't just going to win. I'd make sure they fought twice before coming after me again. The deposition was my first real taste of leverage, and I realized how much power comes from having the truth organized and ready to strike at the right moment. I spent the next few weeks turning my binder into a weapon, every page labeled, cross-referenced, and tabbed. Evidence of hacking attempts, printed with IP logs, a notarized statement from my internet provider, proof of false insurance cancellations, dates, times, reversal letters, security footage of Dean trespassing from 3 angles synced together on a thumb drive. But the most devastating evidence wasn't even about me. While digging through county records one night, I discovered a pending foreclosure notice on my parents' house. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I drove to the county clerk's office. It wasn't. Their home, the one we grew up in, was weeks away from auction. Suddenly, everything clicked. Their rage at my buying a house wasn't about favoritism or Dean's future. It was fear. A younger version of me might have felt pity, maybe even offered to help, but that version was gone. They had tried to ruin me. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one. I called my lawyer that night. "Interesting leverage," he said in that calm way lawyers do when they know exactly how to use information. "If they keep pushing, we can subpoena their financials. Once those foreclosure notices are part of the record, it'll be hard for them to keep playing righteous parents." The timing couldn't have been better. HR not only cleared me, but offered a formal letter attesting to my character and performance. My boss even volunteered to testify if needed. I had credibility. They didn't. But I wasn't going to let the hearing be the end. Quietly, I lined up defenses they didn't know about. I met with my bank to get pre-approved for a line of credit. I consulted a real estate attorney, not to sell my house, but to be ready if they tried any last-minute stunt. And I started talking to family members, not to beg, but to show them the truth. I showed my aunt the forged texts, Dean's trespassing report, even HR's letter. Watching her face shift from smug judgment to quiet shock was satisfying. Words spread fast. Cousins who'd been distant sent neutral texts. We're not sure what's happening, but we don't want to be on the wrong side of it. Dean, meanwhile, had no idea the tide was turning. He strutted on social media, posting digs about me, sharing GoFundMe links for his housing situation, conveniently omitting that he wasn't actually homeless, just angry he didn't have a free house. Mom called me the night before the hearing. Her tone was sugar-coated, always a bad sign. "Cody," she said, "there's still time to make this right. Sign over the house, or at least sell it and give your brother the profit. Let's end this before it gets ugly." I laughed. "Mom, it's already ugly, and tomorrow it's going to get public." A long pause. "You'll regret this," she said. Maybe once I would have, but now I was ready. The morning of the court date, I put on my best suit. Nothing flashy, but sharp enough to make a point. I printed 2 extra copies of the foreclosure notice and slipped them behind the forged screenshots, not because I was sure we'd need them, but because I wanted to be ready. Walking into the courthouse felt surreal. My parents sat with Dean at their side. Mom looked smug. Dad looked angry. Dean looked like he was about to win the lottery. They didn't know the game had changed. I wasn't coming to defend myself anymore. I was coming to win and make sure they never forgot it. Before the judge even called the case, the cracks began to show. My lawyer quietly handed their attorney a copy of the forensic analysis on the fake texts, along with a list of potential counterclaims: harassment, attempted fraud, and defamation. Their attorney's face went pale. For the first time in months, I felt like, for once, the power was in my hands. And the best part, I still had one last advantage if I needed it: financial records that could expose their entire image in front of the whole family. I had no intention of using it unless they forced my hand. But if they did, I was fully prepared. The courtroom was quiet, with only the shuffle of papers and the occasional cough breaking the silence. I sat upright, my folder neatly in place before me. For the first time since this ordeal began, I wasn't sick to my stomach. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't doubting myself. When the judge called our case, we all rose. My parents and Dean walked to the plaintiff's table, while I took my seat at the defense table beside my lawyer. My mother shot me a look meant to intimidate, the same glare she used when I tracked mud into the kitchen as a child. But this time, it had no effect. Their attorney opened with a rehearsed speech about family duties and economic sabotage. He tried to frame me as the selfish older brother who had intentionally bought a house to block his younger siblings' financial independence. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Counselor," she said slowly, "you're telling me this case is about who bought a house first?" The lawyer stumbled, muttering about intent and fairness. It was clear the judge wasn't impressed. Then it was our turn. My lawyer, calm and precise, began dismantling their claims point by point. He showed years of my savings through bank records, pay stubs from my high school jobs, and proof that I had paid rent to my parents while living at home. This purchase, he said, holding up the closing documents, is the result of nearly a decade of discipline and hard work. There is no evidence my client interfered with the plaintiff's ability to buy property. In fact, the plaintiff lacks employment, savings, and even pre-approval to make such a purchase. This lawsuit is not just baseless, it is malicious. Then came the exhibits we had reserved. First, security footage. Dean's face turned red as video showed him trespassing on my property, ripping out my sign, and flipping off the camera. The courtroom gasped softly, likely from my aunt. Next came the forged screenshots. My lawyer handed them to the judge, along with forensic analysis. As you can see, Your Honor, these messages were fabricated to portray my client as hostile and threatening. They were created on the plaintiff's own device. The judge's expression hardened. "Plaintiff," she said, looking directly at Dean. "Is this true?" Dean mumbled about jokes and memes, but the damage was done. The judge ordered the documents entered as evidence of bad faith. And then came the final blow. My lawyer slid another document forward. "Your Honor, these public records show the plaintiffs themselves are in default on their mortgage and facing foreclosure. This is relevant as it establishes motive for their attempt to seize my client's property." The room went still. My mother's face drained of color, my father's jaw locked, and Dean looked blindsided. The judge reviewed the records and turned to their attorney. "Counselor, is this accurate?" After a pause, he admitted it was. The judge exhaled sharply. "In light of this, I am dismissing this case with prejudice. They couldn't refile. I should have felt only relief, and I did. But more than that, I felt control coming back to me. And it wasn't over." Outside the courtroom, my lawyer reminded them in front of everyone that we were considering counterclaims for harassment, fraud, and defamation. "My client has endured significant financial and emotional stress as a result of your actions," he said. "We will be seeking damages." My mother looked ready to argue, but my father stopped her. I stayed silent until we stepped outside. Then I finally spoke. "You wanted to take everything from me," I said quietly. "You wanted me broken. Instead, you lost, and everyone saw it. Next time you think about coming after me, remember how this ended." I walked away, leaving them on the courthouse steps. Back in my car, I sat for a moment, just breathing. For months, I had felt like I was drowning. Now, finally, I had my head above water. But this wasn't the end. I called my lawyer. "Let's move forward with the counterclaim," I told him. His voice carried a smile. "I was hoping you'd say that." This step wasn't only about clearing my name. It was about accountability. My lawyer filed claims for harassment, defamation, and attempted fraud, backed by all the evidence. The forged messages, IP logs, security footage, even letters from my job confirming the false complaints had put me on unpaid leave. Their response came a week later, and it was almost comical. The same family that dragged me to court now sent careful letters asking to resolve things privately. My lawyer said it was a good sign. It meant they were worried. And they should have been. When mediation arrived, I entered the room steady and composed. My parents looked worn down. My mother pale. My father exhausted. And Dean, for once, silent and uneasy, fidgeting like a student outside a principal's office. The mediator outlined the claims, and the serious risks they faced if this went to trial. Dean's fake screenshots alone could have brought criminal charges if I pursued them. And the hacking attempt? The police report was already on file. We could have taken it further. At one point, my mother tried to appeal to me. "Cody," she said softly, "you're really going to drag your family through this?" I looked at her and answered calmly, "You dragged me through it. You started this. You don't get to call it unfair now that you've lost." In the end, they settled. The terms were clear. They dropped all future claims, issued a formal written apology, legally binding, and paid restitution for my damages and legal fees. Signing the papers, I felt lighter than I had in months. But the ripple effect didn't stop there. News spread through the family. Cousins who had mocked me now sent messages saying they hadn't known the truth. My aunt, who once guilt-tripped me, showed up with an apology and a pie. Meanwhile, my parents lost their home to foreclosure. Dean moved into a small apartment, still struggling for steady work. I didn't attend the foreclosure auction. I didn't need to. Instead, weeks after the case closed, I hosted a small housewarming. Nothing extravagant, just friends, neighbors, and a few cousins who had stayed neutral. As the sun set, I stood in my backyard, looking at the vegetable garden I had planted months earlier. Lush, full of life, a quiet symbol of what I had built and fought for. That's when my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. It was my mother. "All we ever wanted was for you to be part of this family," she wrote. I stared at it for a moment before replying. "I was part of this family until you decided I wasn't." Then I set my phone down, turned to my guests, and raised a glass. "To new beginnings," I said. They cheered, and for the first time in a long time, I meant it. That night, as I locked the door and switched off the lights, I paused in the quiet of my house. No footsteps upstairs, no slammed doors, no voices demanding what I owed, just peace. And standing there, I realized something. My parents had given me exactly what I needed. Not their approval, not their help, but the freedom to stop trying to earn either one. The fight was over, and I had won.